We have award-winning author Don Helin with us today. He has written a thriller series, political thriller series, and his newest book is a memoir, and it's a good read. Title is From Army Regulations to Novels. Welcome, Don, to Zoom Into Books.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Kathy. It's great to be here. And I know I've got a number of longtime friends who are either in the theater or on Facebook. So I look forward to renewing all those acquaintances again. I just want to give a little bit of background. My wife and I moved to an over 55 community here in central Pennsylvania a few years ago. And at that time, I was a published novelist. So when I came in here, I had a number of novels. And I really, to be honest, didn't know much about memoirs. Then I proceeded to hear a number of fascinating stories about from a lot of friends that I had met. One, Dick, before he retired, he was a state police captain in Maryland. And he was the guy that brought down the Beltway sniper back around 2001. So his memoir is 22 days. So there is no period of time specifically that can be for the length of a memoir. Another friend here that I met at Willow Valley is Willie. He grew up in East Germany. And when he was 18, a friend of his and himself knew they had to leave. They knew they had to get out. So they spent, believe it or not, 6 months down in a basement with a kayaking kit. And they practiced with the lights out, putting that kayak together, taking it apart, packing it up. Then one night, they checked the weather. One night, they stole out on a beach, put that kayak together, and sailed out. And they were picked up by a Danish liner. And the Danish liner eventually dropped them off in West Germany. And that's how Willie made it to West Germany. And what a story some of these people have. And I'll have to say that some of their stories are certainly as exciting as any novels that I've read. And it made me wonder, I wonder if I have a memoir in me. Going back a little bit, many of you know that I'm originally from Minnesota. When I graduated from college, I went in the Army, spent almost 30 years as an Army officer. During that time, I had 3 tours, almost 10 years in the Pentagon, which you get to learn a lot about Washington, D.C. I had a tour in Vietnam, a tour in Germany. And then it was time for me to get out of the service. And I thought, no, now what? And so what I did was I happened to see that the Washington Post was having a travel writing symposium. And I thought, my wife and I like to travel, and maybe I could do that. So it worked out, and I spent about 6-7 years as a travel writer before I moved to the dark side and started writing fiction. And it took me a while to get my first book published. And then I picked up later on travel writing for a newspaper in Harrisburg, TheBurg. Did that for about 8 years. And what I learned was that for travel writing, there's a difference between a travel article and a travel brochure. A travel brochure just gives you the facts. A travel article will help you get inside that place. In other words, what you're trying to do with a travel article is to encourage people to come to that place. And so that's what I learned with creative nonfiction, And that's what has really stood me in good stead for writing novels. So I thought, you know, do I want to write a memoir? Where in the world do I even start? I didn't know that much about memoir. So I said, well, what really is a memoir? And I thought, well, you know, you can start when you're just a little shaver and work your way up. And that's not a memoir. That's an anthology. A memoir is a slice of life. And what you're trying to do is really pick a period of time that you think people might be excited to hear about. So it's a slice of life. It's not your whole life. So I call it putting a picture frame around a certain place on your life's journey and then bringing that alive. That's what you're trying to do. And the thing is, you have to remember it's your story, you know, and you're the foundation of that story. And the richer you make that story, the more people are going to like it. Now, there's always, people catch me and say there's a lot of concerns about, you know, if I go back and I write about somebody and they get mad at me. And I have a really good friend who teaches memoir and creative writing at one of the New York universities, Lori Myers. And Lori did a memoir, and in her memoir, she remembers growing up that her dad did everything he possibly could for his son, you know, and gave him bikes and gave him different toys and all that stuff. And of course, Lori's brother thinks his dad didn't do much for him. So when Lori wrote her memoir, she told it the way she saw it, that's what happened. So there's a couple of truths. People expect you to tell the truth in you writing a memoir. But remember, there are two truths. There's what I call the truth and the story truth. The truth is something you would swear to in a courtroom. The story truth is the best you can remember, the fairest that you can remember in your growing up or in your memoir. And as long as you stick to the best that you can remember, you're probably not going to have a lot of problems. Now you have to say, why? Why would I want to write a memoir? Well, you know, like my friends, they have a powerful story to tell. That could be a good reason. They did the research and they came up with their story. Or you may feel that you want to set the record straight. Something happened and that's not the way you remember it. So you're going to set the record straight. Or it could be therapy for a writer, or to document your life, apportion your life for your family, or like, it's just fun. It's interesting. It's something to do. You have to remember that a memoir melds the accuracy of nonfiction with the storytelling tools of fiction. Creative nonfiction helps bring the scenes alive with enhanced setting and dialogue. What you're trying to do, your story doesn't have to be stranger than fiction to compelling. What you want to do is borrow some of the tools from fiction writing. And this includes interesting and believable characters. And of course, you're going to be the star of the show. Realistic dialogue. And, you know, a lot of people, they may write a memoir, and if they don't use some of these storytelling techniques, their memoir will look like a textbook, because you'll have these huge slots of paragraphs. So what you want to do is use dialogue to break up those paragraphs. And the other thing, you want to have good setting, and you're on your way. And toward the end of the talk, I'd like to briefly mention something that's incredibly important for a writer, and that's what I call mindfulness. But we'll get into that in a minute. Okay, fiction is made up. I do it all the time. Memoir, on the other hand, it's a big difference for the writer. It's not made up. You're digging into your life story. But remember, for the reader, they want a good story. They're going to pick up your memoir and want an interesting story. Just like if they pick up one of my novels, they want an interesting story. And that's what you're hopefully going to provide. So we want to approach your memoir like a novelist, not only to what happened, but the process, and can lead to new depth. And probably one of the key things to do is to make sure you use all the senses. Lots of people, particularly who are new into the writing game, will use the cardinal sense of sight. I saw this, I saw the sunset, on and on and on. And they forget there's a whole lot of other senses that can help bring that article alive. For example, the sense of smell. Let's suppose you're at the beach. You're walking down the beach and you see the setting sun, kids playing, sandcastles, smell salt air, caramel corn. The interesting thing, a lot of people don't realize that the sense of smell is most tied to memory. You pick up a bar of soap and it's a smell and you say, that reminds me of the soap my grandmother used. And that can take you back on a journey to the summers you spent on her farm. So the sense of smell is really tied to memory. And you got the sense of taste. You're walking down the beach and you're drinking a cold beer, you're eating a hot dog. See, what you're trying to do is bring your setting alive by using some of these techniques. And what about hearing? What do you hear? How about the waves beating against the rock? The call of the seagulls? And touch, the sense of touch. Refreshing water, the cool water as you swim, the warm sun on your skin. So what we're getting at is, in total, what you want to do is take all of the fiction writing techniques that we'll be talking about and use them to make your memoir as interesting as a fictional book. And the best way to start is to use all of your senses. Now, I mentioned mindfulness, and this is something that I always emphasize. And lots of times I think it's very easy to forget. Mindfulness is well known. It's to notice the details of your surroundings, whether it be the flavors or the scents or whatever. And when you're writing, you don't want pages that are useless setting, but maybe one or two hard-hitting sentences which brings the reader to that place. And I always suggest to my friends and the people that I'm talking to, each day, walk around and just look and just stop and see what's around you and think about it. That's the way to get what I call a writer's eye, because everything that you can use, that you see, you might be able to use that in a setting. For example, I really enjoy biking. And I was over at the bike shop the other day, and I thought to myself, I wonder if there might be an interesting story about romance in a bike shop or whatever, So what you want to do is bring all of this alive. And Doug McPherson, who wrote the book, Start Writing Today, lists 4 things that you should do. In lesson 1, just observe your surroundings. Just look around, see what you see what you hear. What do you smell? Then lesson 2, he has you write about it. describe the people, describe the setting or whatever. And then lesson 3 is to keep notebooks of all of these settings and things that you've seen. And he thinks it's important, weather is such an important part to him that he suggests keeping a weather diary. So you can go into different time periods. And if you're in the middle of a hurricane, you can get into experience what that and be realistic so people don't think you're a bunch of phony, Okay, now we talk about a memoir. We talk about what is your place, you build a picture frame around a portion of your life, and that's what you're going to focus on for your memoir. Now, how in the world are you going to do that? And you start with research. People that read a memoir are interested in moving, transporting to another place and time. And you're their travel guide. For example, Vietnam. In my memoir, I transport people to Vietnam briefly. The Pentagon. After 3 tours in the Pentagon, I can move you to the Pentagon and try to bring that alive by experiences I had. And what you want are those small details, those little nuggets that people go, oh, yeah, okay. People rushing, whatever. That's what you're trying to do. And what you want to do in your research is to keep an open mind. You may encounter information that runs counter to what you recall. And so you have to say to yourself, do I just want to ignore this? Or do I want to go farther in and figure it out? And that's up to you. You have to make that choice. So memoir always requires a lot of research. If you're writing about a history of your family or whatever, to get some backstory in, will your ancestors come into New York or San Francisco? And you have to be aware of the difference between an important detail and what I call a rabbit hole. What you don't want to do is get caught running down a rabbit hole, pulling out a bunch of information. Unplanned researching can be a terrible waste of time. So, and the thrill of this serendipity information may get you excited, but is it something you can use, or are you just wasting your time? And for me, in my story, my memoir, I had interviewed some of my friends. And so what I did is I interviewed them briefly so that I could try to get their stories involved. Okay, so now you've done your research, and what you want to do is take that picture frame of the small portion of the journey of your life and begin to develop that. So your research is going to lead you to what I call a tipping point. In novels, we call it an inciting incident. But it may not be an incident. So I like to think of it as just a tipping point. So the inciting incident or a tipping point is the narrative that launches the main action. And it's not just necessarily the first item. You may have some background information, but the inciting incident or the tipping point is significant for the main character. And this is what you want to use to engage the reader. And you'll recognize this inciting incident as the event that really triggers the primary action. It doesn't have to necessarily be absolutely the first event, but it's the one that gets things moving, and your causes a problem in the protagonist's career, may require him to try to redeem his career. It could be an important relationship between friends, and you may need to build that back again. Maybe your protagonist has a lot to lose, so you want your reader to be rooting for him. Now, like any story, a memoir has a beginning, a middle, and an end. So at the beginning, you want to have something's got to happen to get that story going. And then you kind of build through it. And at the end, it's what I always try to use in my novels, what I call bookending, where we start out with the inciting incident and we end with something that kind of ties it together. So you need to keep that in mind as you're doing your memoir, is that this is a picture frame and you need two sides to that picture frame. Now, one of the people I think who writes terrific novels and terrific memoirs is Danny Shapiro. And Danny, the memoir Inheritance, which you might enjoy reading, Danny just spontaneously decides to take a DNA test, just something to see a little bit about her family tree. And when that result comes back, her father had died 20 years before, and she was very close to her dad. When that DNA comes back, it turns out that her father is not her biological father. Can you imagine what a tipping point or inciting incident? It makes you say, how did that happen? And Danny is very good about taking you along on the journey that she takes to try to help figure out what in the world had happened. Now, for me, my tipping point is I started during my time when I left the military. As I mentioned, I was almost 30 years in the military. And so from writing Army regulations to writing novels, and in that period of time that I built that picture frame around that period of time, because during that time, I received some very difficult medical issues that I had to deal with. And so that's kind of what I have. Now, let me just summarize a little more about a memoir. So I mentioned this, but I think it's critical because I know I was teaching a class here and people were still confusing a memoir with an anthology. And a memoir is much shorter. So just think of that as that slice of life and that picture frame. But like any story, that memoir has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And so you need to try to work out some sort of a way to do that. And there are a number of steps. I mentioned the creative nonfiction, and I just like to briefly summarize some of the critical steps in that creative nonfiction. And maybe over time we can talk about some more of these. First of all, I've mentioned research. You need to have quality research for your story. And then you need a structure. In other words, some way to put your book together, put your story together. And there are normally two types of structures. Number one is a chronological. This happens, and then that happens, and then this happens. And usually when something happens, it causes something else to happen. Or an episodic. For example, an episodic structure could be kind of like LA Law, where each week there's a short weekly program, but then it fits into the same characters over a longer period. And that's what I adopted. I adopted an episodic structure. My time in Germany and Vietnam and the Pentagon and different places as I tried to deal with all the things that were coming upon me. Now, the difference between a memoir and fiction is a memoir is not something you invent. It's not something you think up, in the dark of night. It's something you uncover by digging. You doing your research and you talk to people and all those sort of stuff. For character, your characters, people have to understand what makes them tick. And that's why motivation is absolutely critical. What's the motivation of your lead person? For Danny Shapiro, her motivation is to find out what happened to her dad. How did this happen? And there are a number of people that she talks to along the way, and she helps you understand these people, and you make it interesting and what motivates them. I mentioned earlier how important dialogue is, and because you can use dialogue to break up these huge paragraphs that can be incredibly dull. And sometimes your dialogue, if you're thinking back a number of years, a dialogue between you and a friend or whatever, it may not be perfect as far as perfectly exact, but it's the best you can remember. And it's kind of the points that you think they're made. And then point of view, of course, the point of view is through your own point of view. It's through your story, it's your story, and it's told through your point of view. Author Elizabeth Sims, I just pulled a comment out from her. She says, if you approach the process of a memoir as a novelist does, opening yourself up to the experiences you want to write about, but to not only that, but to the process of storytelling itself, and let your writing lead you to new depths, then you'll be creating a memoir not only compelling for your readers, but brimming with bounty for you. And then I'd just like to close my short discussion. I had mentioned the importance of point of view, that it's your story. And what you want to do through your story is to bring your reader into your body, so they can see what you see, they can feel what you felt every step of the way. You're like a virtual reality camera that your people, your readers are going to be able to follow. And let me just read this. I think this is important. The period of your life covered by your memoir makes sense to you because you lived it. Though other people write memoirs to make sense of what changed in them, the reader needs to make sense of your life so that they can understand what happened. And so your task is to not tell them what happened. It's your task is to bring them along on the journey so they can experience. And just a piece of parting advice of how important this is storytelling of a memoir is a misnomer. You're not telling a story to a friend over a beer. You're bringing them into that story so they can see, they can feel what you felt. To do that effectively, you need to understand your point of view and remain true to it through the scene. In other words, as you're telling your story, it ought to be what you see, what you felt, what you heard, not just what happened. What I'd like to do briefly is to just take and read the opening couple pages of my memoir and give you kind of my inciting incident. And I was really proud of the fact it has not been out that long, but it's already won honorable mention from the New England Book Festival and the Southern California Book Festival. So let me just take about 5 minutes and read the first 3 pages. National Cancer Institute, June 23rd, 1983, 1:00 p.m. The June heat and humidity in Washington, D.C. felt oppressive to Lane and I as we walked across the parking lot at the National Cancer Institute and into the side door to reach the elevators. The Institute was part of the National Institute of Health. It was located in Baltimore, Maryland, in Bethesda, Maryland, on a campus-like environment of 75 buildings spread all over 300 acres. So definitely a challenge to find the NCI, National Cancer Institute, for the first time. The doctors at Walter Reed Army Medical Center had referred me for a consultation. It had been a huge surprise and a punch in the gut when the doctors at Walter Reed diagnosed me with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma a month earlier. My heart beat wildly as I pushed the button to take the 2 of us up to our appointment. Things had been going so well. Our blended family, my 2 daughters and 1 son, and Elaine's daughter, were all getting along with only a few blips. And I was on the promotion list to full colonel. All of a sudden, our joy changed. With that diagnosis, what did it all mean? We got off the elevator and walked down the hallway to the oncology office, our heels clicking on the tiles. I pushed open the door, looked around, then walked up to a dark-haired woman sitting behind the desk. My name is Colonel Helin. I have an appointment with Dr. Averbach for 1:00. You notice we're using dialogue here now to kind of break up those big paragraphs. She ran her finger down the page to check the book. Yes, here you are, Colonel. Please take a seat. The doctor will be with you in just a moment. I wanted to tell her I didn't have a minute to wait. I'd been waiting for a week for the results of my biopsy. I hadn't slept. I'd been dealing with nightmares, but it wasn't her fault. So Elaine and I took our seats as she asked. I had arrived in Washington, D.C. from the Army War College a little over 2 years before for an assignment in the Pentagon. Well, at the War College, I had met Elaine at a Parents Without Partners dance. We dated for almost 8 months while I finished my tour at the War College, then kept long-range dating for another 7 months after I moved to the Pentagon. We married in January 1982, and Elaine and her daughter Jessica joined me in Washington about 1.5 years ago. A short nurse with red hair came over and shook me out of my reverie. Colonel Helin, please come with me. I stood and I wondered if I might fall over from the case of the nerves. Elaine held onto my left arm. I felt like an old man, and I was only 42 years old in my peak of life. Now this. We followed her into an office with a desk, an exam table, some routine medical equipment, and a couple of chairs. She took my vital signs and handed me a white gown. Please take a seat on the bench and remove your clothes except for your underwear. Doctor will be with you in a moment. She turned and left, shut the door. I hung up my clothes, slipped on my gown, and hopped onto the table. Elaine gave me a thumbs up. Hang in there. I hope we'll get some good news. Everbach walked in, and I called yes, and he walked into the room. Tall and sandy-haired, he moved with quick, choppy strides. He looked down at my leg. As I understand it, Colonel, the place they took the biopsy is on your upper left thigh and under your arm. I nodded and pulled the gown up to show him. The biopsy sites look good, he said. He straightened and walked over to the desk, then took a seat. I couldn't wait for him to bumble around. What did the biopsy show? He opened my file and glanced down for a moment. Then he looked directly at me. We biopsied 2 lymph nodes in your leg and 1 under your arm. I'm sorry to say they all showed positive for the lymphoma. I wanted to put my head in my hands. I couldn't believe it. I straightened. Are you absolutely sure? The doctor stared at me for a moment, then nodded slowly. I had trouble talking, so Elaine asked, what does it mean? It's not a good sign. It means the cancer has spread into the lymph system. Unfortunately, this places Colonel Helin in stage 4. Doctor, I said, trying to contain my voice, tell me what stage 4 means. Averbach took a deep breath. Because the cancer has spread, it will be harder for us to stop it. Elaine swallowed hard. Is there a threat to life? The doctor nodded. What? I almost cried out. Tell me exactly what this means. Do I have to get my affairs in order? The doctor took a deep breath. Okay. It means that on average, patients in stage 4 have a lifespan of approximately, and he paused, 6.5 years. Elaine and I looked at each other, neither of us able to speak. I was only 42. He was telling me I might not make it till 50. The doctor raised his hand to catch our attention. Here at the Institute, we have begun a study protocol for patients with your diagnosis who served in Vietnam and had been exposed to Agent Orange. That fits me, I said. If you agree, we will randomize you into one of 2 test groups. Each group will receive a different treatment. Our hope is that we can find the best way to treat your symptoms. Elaine and I looked at each other again. Neither of us is sure what to say next. The doctor leaned forward, holding my file in his hands. I know this must be an awful shock. I suggest you go home and think about what I've said. I'll make an appointment with our administrative group who will help you randomize into one of the study arms if that's what you choose to do. He stood. And Colonel Helin, I'm sorry the news couldn't be any better. I want you to know we'll do everything possible to help you through this. He opened the door and closed it quietly. Bastard couldn't wait to get out of here, I groused. Elaine nodded. I dressed as if I was in a trance, my mind running in all directions. Pushing the clinic door open, I rushed out in the hallway, afraid I might be sick. We stood at the elevator waiting, and then rode it to the ground floor. My mind was reeling from what I had just heard. I felt good. How could this be? How would I tell our children? Okay, thank you for listening. That's my tipping point. And like the others that I've mentioned, what we're trying to do with the tipping point or the inciting incident is to catch the reader's attention and see if they will follow along to find out what happened, just like Danny and the DNA test. And hopefully the reader will keep reading. What I'd like real briefly to do is to just mention our anthology that we did. And this was a lot of fun, and we had a terrific program. And what we did in May of 2020, we had a number of people attend our Zoom into Book class, similar to what we did here. Headline Books then posted a call for memoirs, and we found the response was overwhelming. We ended up publishing 32 memoirs, which was around a third of what we got. And we had memoirs of healthcare workers, educators, people who have experienced loss, writers and entertainers, without audiences, and a special group that has been so much fun to work with, what I call the sixth graders. And we were able to select a number of them. And as we went through, I mention this because for those of you that might be interested in seriously doing a memoir, you'll find the variances and the variations in here. We have one who, her memoir is a tidal wave, and she worked in one of the hospitals. So you can imagine what that tidal wave meant. Or we've got Joe Coleman. You know, Joe was the lead singer for the Platters, and his memoir is titled When the Music Stopped. Then you've got a friend, good friend, Donna Lease, and hers is Her Anxiety is Calling, to show people she shows people who have an anxiety or a frustration and a concern, how she dealt with it. And I think that's incredibly important. Then my good friend, Drama Denver. She's the wife of Bob Denver, who was on, she and he were on Gilligan's Island for years. And then the students, I think you have to enjoy those students. And the voices from the pandemic, it was the best anthology at the New England Book Festival. It won a gold medal in the Mom's Choice Award. So it would be a great book if you're interested in reading a variety of different memoirs. I think you'll find that one to be very helpful. At that point, I think I'll turn it back to Kathy and we'll see if we have any questions.
Thank you, Don. I can't stress enough to the people watching what a great read your memoir is, from Army regulations to novels. And that reading that you did, we had a comment on Facebook. She said you really put her in the moment and she's going to get your book.
Oh, that's good to hear.
And I have to confess, I had never heard of creative nonfiction till Don came on Zoom into Books and started doing his memoir workshops. And we will be doing a new series, excuse me, of memoir workshops starting in a few months. So if you'll watch the Zoom into Books website, zoomintobooks.com, we'd be happy to have you join us, and it will go over a few months. Don, would you like to tell people what you have coming up next?
Well, I just finished and sent in to my wonderful publisher my eighth thriller, and it's called Twins. And I expect that it will be out in the next month or so. And as a matter of fact, we'll be going to the AWP in Philly in March. And I hope we'll be able to showcase it there. And for some of you that are on the East Coast, we hope to see you there.
Absolutely. Twins is in production now, so it will be out in just a few months. Don will also be in the Headline Books booth in Washington, D.C., the end of June for the American Library Association National Conference. I want to thank everyone for joining us on Facebook. You can read about all the Zoom into Book authors and watch the videos on our YouTube channel, plus the Zoom into Books Facebook page has all the videos there too. So we want to thank everyone for joining us. Thank you, Don, and we will have you back very soon.
And thank you, Kathy, for setting this all up. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.